So good to be with you guys today. In case you don't know me, my name's Nathan. I'm not the usual pastor here at Edge City Little Neck. Pastor Martin, who's normally here, is preaching at our other campus in Mineola. And then the pastor at Mineola, Pastor Finn, was supposed to preach here but hurt his back, and so I'm kind of filling in. I'd like to introduce you to my family. I've got a picture that, is it up there? Okay. So full disclosure, actually, the only people in this picture that are here right now are me and my oldest, Gabe. When you have a kid in school, the plague comes through your family every couple weeks. So, but you got my wife, Liana, and then I've got 3 children, Gabriel, Selah, and then Haziah is the one I'm holding. When you have 3 kids under the age of 4, you can never get them to all smile at the same time, ever. So kudos for Meg for taking this picture. She did a great job. Every family is special. You know, if I come to you and I ask, what about your family is special? You can give me some things. It might have to do with memories. It might be traits. It could be any number of things. One of the things that's really special about my family, you can see just when you look at the picture. My family is multiracial. My 2 older children are related to me biologically, Gabe and Selah, but my youngest child is related to me through adoption. He is not related to Liana or I biologically at all. He was adopted from India. And that's really where I'm kind of wanting to go with this talk today. Many of you helped us in many different ways as we adopted Zaya. But when we landed in the airport, Pastor Stephen, Hung Soo, and Pastor Martin were all there to greet us. And as Stephen's driving us home, he turns to me and he says, "Hey, could you write a sermon about adoption now?" And in addition to just the being able to write that, it was actually a really big blessing just to process. This is what our family has just done. And this is the way it relates to our relationship with God. And so the Bible, in several different places, talks about our relationship with God like an adoption. And here's a few examples. In John 1:12, says, "To all who received him, to those who believed in his name, he gave the right to become children of God." I would not say that Gabriel or Selah became my children. They were born into it. But Zaya, at 9 months old, became my son. And this is the language the Bible chooses to use when talking about us and knowing him. As well, it'd be a little more blatant. In Galatians 4 and 5, it says, "When the set time had come, God sent his son, born of a woman, born under the law, to redeem those under the law, that we might receive adoption to sonship." As well, in Ephesians 1:5, it says, "He predestined us for adoption to sonship through Jesus Christ, in accordance with his pleasure and will." So with this, we're going to walk through how adoption works as well as how it relates to our relationship with God. And I'm going to share 3 different stories in this. The first is going to be the story of a biblical character named Moses. And I'll share a little more about who specifically he is, but he's adopted, and we're going to kind of walk through his adoption story. The second, I'll share Zaya's adoption story, and I'll refer to that both as Zaya's adoption as well as our family's adoption story because they're one and the same. And then the third story we'll talk through is our spiritual adoption stories. If you are a follower of Christ, this is a story that you are already in. You're already adopted. And if you're considering becoming a believer in Christ, that is what you're considering, is whether or not you're going to allow this adoption to happen. And so that's kind of our roadmap this morning. And And so I want to take you guys back to about 4 years ago when Liana and I decided we were going to adopt. We had always talked about adopting ever since we were married, but our oldest was born, and we were trying to figure out next steps for our family and thought, let's find out some stuff. And so we Google adoption, and through Googling adoption, we end up finding an adoption agency. And then next thing we know, we're signing about a 50 to 100-page document saying that we're about to adopt a child. And so then the next thing that happens is we get in a call with the social worker who works for this agency that we just signed on with. And I'll never forget what she told us. The social worker was going to be walking through every step, every part of our adoption. And she happened to be a Christian. And the first thing she told us was this. She said, guys, Nathan and Liana, I am excited for your adoption to mirror Christ's relationship with the church. But you need to understand that your adoption story starts with a tragedy. You need to understand your adoption story starts with a tragedy. That is how adoption stories start. And we're going to see that starting off in the book of Exodus, chapter 1, looking at Moses' story. A little background for Moses. He is probably the most significant character in the Old Testament. What he does is he leads the Jewish people through an event called the Exodus of Egypt, and through the rest of the Jewish history, when they're down or doubting God, the prophets remind them of the Exodus of Egypt. And as well, he writes the first 5 books of the Old Testament, recognized by both the Christians and the Jewish people. And so to say he's the most significant character in the Old Testament is not an exaggeration at all. And his story starts in Exodus chapter 1. The king of Egypt said to the Hebrew midwives, whose names were Sapphira and Puah, when you are helping the Hebrew women during childbirth on the delivery stool, if you see the baby is a boy, kill him. And if it is a girl, let her live. Now, I'm going to kind of fast forward through the next couple of verses, but long story short, they don't do it. They refuse. And that brings us to verse 22. Then Pharaoh gave this order to all his people. Every Hebrew boy that is born you must throw into the Nile, but let every girl live. Now a man of the tribe of Levi married a Levite woman, and she became pregnant and gave birth to a son. When she saw that he was a fine child, she hid him for 3 months. But when she could hide him no longer, she got a papyrus basket for him and coated it with tar and pitch. Then she placed the child in it and put it among the reeds along the bank of the Nile. So Moses' story starts with a literal genocide. The Jewish people are enslaved to the Egyptians, and the Egyptian Pharaoh is trying to control their population. And this is the setting that Moses' life starts in. He's a refugee on the run. Moses' adoption story starts with a tragedy. I'm going to transition to Zaya's adoption story. When Zaya was no more than maybe a couple weeks old, he was abandoned on the streets of Calcutta. Most common question I get about him after the people find out that he's adopted is they ask, what do you know about his parents? The truth is, I know nothing. There's nothing for me to know. Some days Zaya may choose to pursue like learning more through a genetic test or something, but we're leaving that for him to decide. But that's where Zaya's story starts, is abandonment. Zaya's adoption story starts with a tragedy. Children like Zaya are why Mother Teresa started her ministry in Calcutta, where Zaya actually coincidentally is from. I wanted to put a little bit just about adoption itself in this talk, just because I think it is important. To give you some numbers, and by the way, there's a picture, I think, of Mother Teresa that should come up here. In 2024, there were more than 5,600 children abandoned in India alone. And then worldwide, there's about 140 million children who are waiting on homes. So if adoption is something that you've considered, you should know that there's a really big need. It can't be overstated how big the need is. And Liana and I would be happy to talk to anybody about what that looks like. But every single one of these children, their story starts with a tragedy. You know, it might be something with their parents, it might be something external, but it starts with a tragedy. Spiritual adoption stories also start with tragedies. The tragedy is sometimes something that we personally do or something that kind of happens to us. But our spiritual stories always start with tragedy. I could tell you about a friend of mine who tried fulfilling his life through building as much wealth as he could. And then when he lost it all, just felt alone and helpless. I could tell you about a friend of mine, and by the way, I'm not saying who these people are, who put all of his hope and identity in personal accomplishments, specifically even like sports. And then when the accomplishments ran dry, or even if they did succeed, at the end of the day, it felt empty. They felt empty inside. I could tell you about a friend of mine who pursued pleasure at all costs, whether it was certain experiences or partners or attempts at joy. Every time felt more empty. I could tell you about another friend of mine who felt that her life needed to revolve around her family. But when her family turned out the way she wasn't hoping it would, ended up feeling lost, abandoned. I could tell you about friends who tried to, just be viewed as a good person, whether it was to someone in particular or in the eyes of God, and continue to just see their sin and brokenness as a result. I can tell you about a friend who, because of some things that their family was going through, his father actually told him to kill his mother, and then he didn't. But later on, when his religion told him that God was the Father, he said, "I want nothing to do with that." I can tell you so many different stories like this, and you guys can all relate to this because we live in a broken world. And our lives are surrounded by tragedy. And that's where our spiritual stories start. James 1:14 and 15 kind of makes me think of this. It says, "Each person is tempted when they are dragged away by their own desires and enticed. Then, after desire has conceived, it gives birth to sin. And sin, when it is fully grown, gives birth to death." Our spiritual adoption stories start with tragedy. But the good news in that is that God does not leave us in that tragedy. After the tragedy, God intervenes and he changes the story. A miracle begins to take shape. Let's look at this again in Exodus 2. It says, when she could hide him no longer, this is talking about Moses' mother, when she could hide him no longer, she got a papyrus basket for him and coated it with tar and pitch. Then she placed the child in it and put it among the reeds along the bank of the Nile. His sister stood at a distance to see what would happen to him. Then Pharaoh's daughter went down to the Nile to bathe, and her attendants were walking along the riverbank. She saw the basket among the reeds and sent her female slave to get it. She opened it and saw the baby. He was crying, and she felt sorry for him. "This is one of the Hebrew babies," she said. I think there's two really, really blatant miracles in this story if you kind of look at it objectively. The first one is the fact that Moses isn't caught. And kind of need to read between the lines with this a little bit, okay? They are drowning children in the Nile. Think about where you want to hide a child who that is the threat. Do you want to hide him in the Nile? No. I really believe that this was a close call. I think that, again, I'm reading between the lines, but I think that in this moment, they almost got caught with Moses. And they thought, what do we do? Let's throw him in this basket in the Nile. As well, it seems like he's somewhat close to either the palace or where the royal family is, and that's also not where you want Moses to be. And so the first miracle is just that Moses isn't caught. The second miracle revolves around Pharaoh's daughter. Again, one of the people you do not want to catch Moses is Pharaoh's daughter. Okay? As soon as she sees Moses, she knows this is a Hebrew boy, he's the son of a slave, and he is sentenced to die by my father. And for whatever reason, we don't know why, it could be long-term animosity, or it could be just in this moment, finding compassion in her heart, she chooses to let Moses live. She spares his life. The miracles in this are there. God changes the story, and Moses' life is spared. Zia's story involves at least two miracles as well. To give a little background, in Indianapolis, there is an orphanage that I'm guessing most major cities in the U.S. have, and they're probably very similar. But in this orphanage, they have a box. Every year, about 100 children are abandoned in the U.S. every year. And in this box, if a parent comes and puts their child in the box closes, and immediately 911 is called to protect that child's life. Zia didn't have that. Zia was found by a random person in the streets, and they saved his life. They took him to a hospital. The hospital took care of him, fed him, and then they took him to an orphanage that put him in the adoption system. A miracle is what enabled Zia to join her family. It's the only part that's happening on. It makes me think of Psalm 27:10. Though my father and mother forsake me, the Lord will receive me. God intervened and protected Zia's life. He did a miracle. The second miracle involves Leon and I, and it really just involves our pursuit of adoption. Full disclosure, adoption was probably one of the hardest things we've ever done in our lives. It involved so many scenarios where we're like, I don't know how we get what we need, but we need to figure out how to find it. And so many times where, we had to drop what we were doing and go take care of something. So much money. A lot of difficult and vulnerable conversations. It was not an easy process. But the results of the process itself, also a lot of waiting, a ton of waiting. It took us 3 years. The result of the process itself, as well as our motivation and our calling with it, are the miracle. And so while Zia's adoption story starts with a tragedy, God intervened and did a miracle. Our spiritual adoption stories also involve miracles. I'm going to just share one just as an example of a friend of mine named Pierre. He's a student on one of my campuses. Pierre grew up Jehovah's Witness, which, if you're not familiar, is it's an offshoot of Christianity, but they're not really Christians. And really found that there wasn't a lot of truth in what they were teaching, and felt a lot of emptiness in that religion. And so as a student, one day he decides, hey, why don't I check out a young adult group at this church nearby? And so he visits that church, and at that church he meets a student on his campus named Matthew. Okay, and Matthew has just gotten back from a mission trip, so he's fired up, and he also is trying to start a Bible study on Pierre's campus. And so, they get a friendship going, and Pierre starts coming to Matthew's Bible study. One day, Matthew tricks Pierre into coming on a fall retreat, and with all of these, he's hearing the gospel. It's not the first time I've heard of that, but it happens. We trick sometimes. Sometimes people get tricked. But he continues to hear the gospel. He continues to hear about who Jesus is and what he's done, the true message. As this happens, he starts getting more questions, and so he ends up going to where we all go when we have questions, YouTube. And through YouTube, he finds this guy named Cliff Knechtley, who, if you were involved with InterVarsity in the 80s and 90s, you might be like, they're still talking about that guy? But basically, Cliff had started in the 80s going on campuses and just talking to students about Jesus. And then a few years ago, his son started posting his videos on YouTube, and they went viral. There's actually a picture I've got here of Cliff sharing the gospel with the guy who beat up Mike Tyson a few months ago on his podcast. And he shares the gospel with Logan Paul, and 4 million people get to see it. Cliff's ministry has exploded in the past couple of years. It's reaching more people than ever before. And this is where Pierre starts finding some of the answers to his questions. This is through this guy on YouTube. In addition, while all this is happening, I get to meet with him. I actually met him on the retreat, and I share the gospel with him. And, he tells me, I think this is totally true, but I'm not ready to make Jesus Lord of my life. There's too many pleasures I'm seeking. I know I'm going to have to let those go. Continue praying with him, preaching the gospel to him. A few months later, I'm in a Bible study with him, and it's me and a couple other students at this table. And one of the students asks how someone who's a Christian can know that they're saved. And Pierre says, I know I'm saved because I put my faith in Christ. He will never let me down. All of these steps that I shared might seem really minor, but they're all significant. For Pierre to know Christ, me, Matthew, and Cliff all have to know Christ as well. And all three of us need to be able to voice who Jesus is to Pierre and share with him who Jesus is. And for that to happen, each of us have to have those same stories. In our spiritual adoption stories, after the tragedy, God does a miracle and opens the doors to a new life. If you're a believer, I want to encourage you, think through the miracles that brought you to Christ. Think through everything God had to do in order to help you know who Jesus was. If you're not a believer, there might be a miracle happening right now. It's not even because of me, but just the fact that you are in a room full of people who know Jesus is a miracle, incredible miracle. You may even be going through some really difficult things, whether you're a believer or not, that you're like, this doesn't feel like a miracle. But even that always kind of brings me to Psalm 71. It says, though you made me see troubles many and bitter, you will restore my life again. From the depths of the earth, you will bring me up. You will again bring me up. You will increase my honor and my comfort once more. In the midst of our tragedies, God does a miracle. And it brings me to the last point. After the miracle, there is a transformation, a new identity. Let's look at Moses' story again. Starting verse 6. She opened it and saw Exodus 2, verse 6. She opened it and saw the baby. He was crying, and she felt sorry for him. This is one of the Hebrew babies, she said. Then his sister asked Pharaoh's daughter, shall I get you one of the Hebrew women to nurse the baby for you? Yes, go, she answered. So the girl went and got the baby's mother. Pharaoh's daughter said to her, take this baby and nurse him for me, and I will pay you. So the woman took the baby and nursed him. When the child grew older, she took him to Pharaoh's daughter, and he became her son, and she named him Moses, saying, I drew him out of the water. We got to not miss this. There is a new identity formed. Moses is born a slave and is forced to be a refugee by the people in power. But as a miracle happens and Pharaoh's daughter has compassion on him, he becomes the son of the king, the one who's even calling for him to die. And even significantly with this, don't miss who names him. We don't know what Moses' mother named him, or his biological mother. The name comes from his adoptive mother, the daughter of Pharaoh. She calls him Moses. This actually is kind of slick. It's a bit of a double meaning, because in Hebrew it means which it says there, I drew him out of water. It also kind of is similar to the word for son, from what I understand. I'm not a Hebrew expert at all. But in Egyptian, it also means come from water. She chose something that would have a meaning and identity both for him as well as the family he was a part of. After the miracle, we get a new identity. This is true for Zaiah's story as well. Before he was adopted by us, Zaiah was known as Akshat. Akshat means unharmed, which is incredibly fitting for when you know his story. And this is a very common name in India, but if he's growing up here, it's a little too close to a cuss word, so we were like, we need to change that. And so we named him Haziah Zahir Walden. Haziah means God sees. And we chose that name because we believe God saw him when he was alone and abandoned. And he will continue to watch him. Zahir we chose because it's a typical name in Calcutta, where he's from, and we wanted him to have that connection. But it means to shine, which if you see him, you know, that's how people often describe him, is in similar lines. And then the name Walden means that he's a part of our family. He will always be a part of our family. We will raise him and provide for him. We will be there through the good and the bad for him. He will always have that place. These pictures that I put up here are kind of significant. The one with the yellow background, that is the first piece of mail he ever got that said, Haziah Zahir Walden. And then the one that's below that is a medical document. We needed it like 4 times to get out of India with him. But it says, Akshat is now known as Haziah Zahir. Zaiah, after the miracle, has a new identity. He's a new person. In the same way, our spiritual adoption stories involve a new identity. Now, this won't necessarily always mean we take a new name when we become a Christian. Most people don't. But we are still a new person. At the beginning, I read Galatians 4. I think I only read verse 4. But if we read the whole thing, actually, it ends up fitting really well with this. So starting in verse 3, it says, also when we were underage, we were in slavery under the elemental spiritual forces of the world. We were in tragedy. But when the time had fully come, God sent his son, born of a woman, born under the law, to redeem those under the law. God intervened and did a miracle, that we might receive adoption to sonship. We started off as slaves to the world, separated from God, having no chance. And God is going to intervene. Jesus is going to come, live a perfect life, and accomplish things that we couldn't. And then we are adopted as sons and daughters of God. Galatians continues with this. Starting in verse 4, it says, when the time had fully come, God sent his son born of a woman under the law to redeem those under the law, that we might receive adoption to sons. Because you guys are his sons, God sent the spirit of his son into our hearts, the spirit who calls out, Abba, Father. We have a new identity, and it is in Christ. The tragedies that we tend to want to identify ourselves with, we do not identify ourselves with anymore. We identify ourselves as children of God. We are heirs. Everything is new. John 14:18 says, I will not leave you as orphans. I will come to you. He has come to every one of you. What does it mean to be adopted by God? Why is that significant? Being adopted by God, I think, has very similar things to what it means for Zaya to be adopted by Liana and I. In being adopted, God provides all of our needs, every single one that we have, abundantly. He raises us as a parent raises a child. He helps us to become more like him. He gives us love and compassion, and he disciplines sometimes as well. In being adopted, God celebrates with us. When you are excited and joyful, God is celebrating with you. And on the flip side, when you are mourning, when the pain of this world is too much, God is right there, mourning with you, comforting and weeping with you. The pastor out in Manhattan named Tim Keller used to say, there's only one person in the castle who's willing to wake up the king in the middle of the night for a glass of water. It's his child. That's the access we have. Do you believe that God is a father to you like that? Do you think that he's far away? Do you think that he's non-existent or angry and vengeful? Or do you think that he is here for you to approach him? Would the band go ahead and come up? Think about, what if your relationship with God was like a father? Was like this is describing. You may not be adopted yet. And I want to encourage you to recognize that God could be a loving father for you and wants to be a loving father for you. You may be adopted, and this is something that is hard to remember. I know it's hard to remember for me sometimes. But my prayer is that you will understand that God is here with you. He is passionate to be your father.